In this world, we see there are many divides. For example, economic divide between rich and poor, or educational divide between those who are informed and those who are not informed. And often in developing world countries, there's a lot of poverty and a lot of lack of knowledge about things. But the divide I want to talk about right now is the time divide. And what I mean to say is that, spiritual practices and spiritual retreats, typically they're done during the day, and at night people sleep. And, the exceptions of that are like ayahuasca ceremonies, or sometimes mushrooms that people do them in the evening, and certain shamanic practices. But the thing is that what often happens to people who are troubled, who've lost connection with the spiritual life, is they're staying up late at night, or they have insomnia, or both. And so it's harder for them to get spiritual counsel or spiritual experiences when it's the wee hours, right? And yet sometimes the early hours, some people say 3 a.m. is this amazing time for spiritual practice. So how do we figure this out? Well, I'm going to be in the Philippines, and by the time you're hearing this, I'm probably there. And so the idea is that people can have a live experience in the wee hours of the night, but I don't need to stay up. I just can't stay up in the wee hours of the night. Or if I am awake in those times, it's to do meditation and not to be talking. So I'm going to use the time difference as an advantage instead of a disadvantage. I'm a speech-language pathologist by practice, and there's only a few hours of the day in the Philippines where you can practice for people in a reasonable hour. But spiritual practice, I think this is an opportunity to do something different. So what I want to talk about here is Jung had these 4 stages: the call, the trial, the return, the bardo. He referred to them primarily, if not exclusively, with respect to stories that we hear across cultures and across time. But it's my belief that these are actually primal energies that are existing. And if you map the seasons and the 4 diagrams of the I Ching to these 4 stages, then what you have is the call is the spring. You're shaking off the pure receptivity, the stillness, the emptiness of the bardo, or the abyss. If we're talking about the tree of life, it's the top of the tree, spheres 1, 2, and 3. And to come into this world, or to come into the day from sleep, and often I would say during the day, etc., you go from a state of pure receptivity, that's yin, to the spring, where you have the solid line of yang coming in to create a little bit of a spark. That's the seed, that's the fertilization, that's the beginning. And I would say it's also when you put on the mask. I know this, well, at least I feel this is true, because when I left a 10-day Vipassana meditation, silent, no speaking, no eye contact, I was in a state of heightened receptivity. Everything was very stimulating to me. And in order to go out and meet my friend and his parents, I had to put on, it felt like I was putting on a mask. And that's what Jung talked about, this mask that we put on, we present. Often it comes in the form of an ambition, right? In spring, animals have the ambition to reproduce. And plants have the ambition to open the flowers, to raise their stalks, to bolt toward the sun so they can spread their seeds. And for humans, I would say that when you shake off the slumber of childhood, or when you shake off the feeling of relaxation, or whatever it is, there's this spark that I need to accomplish something into the world. I need to have control over my environment, which is totally reasonable, because for many of us in many countries across the world, we're just working too hard, and our work is not aligned with peace. It's aligned with doing. It's not aligned with being. So it's natural to then think, well, how can I create a situation where I have more freedom? How can I make more money so I have more freedom? The challenge, of course, is when you need to make more money, you're going deeper into the trial. That's the second phase. And the deeper you go into the trial, the more you're trying to do whatever the mask wants to do, which could be ambition, or it could be, flaking out, or being lazy. It could be whatever the mask has decided is going to be happiness, peace. The shadow is going to disagree. It's to create balance. Everything in the universe, as far as I can tell, has opposites operating, right? Finite, infinite. Form, formless. Mortal, immortal. Happy, sad. Good, bad. Light, dark. Gravity, weightlessness, etc. So what we're talking about is in what they called old yang. That's two yang lines, right? That's where you have the tension in expression, because you have the expression of the mask, which had some yin in it, right? It wanted to make you happy, but now we have mask versus shadow. The shadow wants the opposite. You want to be ambitious, it's like, that's too much work. You want to be lazy, it's saying, you really should be doing something. Think about the future. Often in the trial, our ambition or our lack of ambition is driven by a fear of the judgment. That's the return. That's the harvest. Matthew 13 in Christianity talks about this with the wheat and the weed. We're rushing to figure out what is the weed and rip it up. And we think if we get the wheat, we'll be happy. But we don't know what's weed and what weed is. That's all for the harvester. Let's say the universe or God. But we play God, right? We think, I need to do this. I need to prevent that. I need to cause this. I need to get away from that. Desire and aversion, all that from the trial. And in the judgment, we fear, I missed it somehow. I'm going to be judged now, and I'm about to disappear into the bardo, what we refer to as, and was referred to as old yin. And I'm linking that loosely to the top of the tree of life, because the tree of life is the abyss. The double yin is winter, and I've linked that to the bardo. And so we're cycling around this circle for each lifetime, for each day to night, and I would say many times in a day. And so how does this all relate to, doing a spiritual retreat? For you, it's late at night. For me, which will be at a regular hour. Well, we want to see what is the mask that we put on. What is the thoughts that are rising right now that we could link to the mask? And the Enneagram types fit into this, right? So as an Enneagram 6, I want to create community. I want to find truth. I value loyalty. And so it's natural that I would want to start a spiritual community, even if it's mostly virtual with me in the Philippines and the students or people I'm helping, and patients when I'm a speech language pathologist. I'm wearing that hat, that mask. But part of me doesn't want to do any of that. Part of me is like, that's a burden. Why would you take that on? People can be very demanding. So in my trial, if I went ahead and did this, in my trial, I'd be rubbing against the shadow, which is saying we need to do this, and the mask is saying, do we really need to do this? Do we really want to do this? And then in the return, it's letting it go. It's the integration. It's the transcend and include. So you integrate it. You integrate the shadow and the mask as best you can, and then you let it go. You're valuing and seeing and acknowledging as your own ideal parent figure what the mask wants and what the shadow says as opposite. And then you return to the bardo. Now, ultimately, what we're trying to do, in my opinion, is to reverse it. So call, trial, return, bardo. That's CTRB. We're trying to actually be called to the bardo. And that would be to rise up the tree of life, to be called to the bardo, right out of the gate. You're here on earth, sphere 10 of the tree of life, and you're saying, I could just focus on the material. I could focus on the future. I could focus on the past. I could focus on ambition or the suppression of ambition. Or I could turn my ambition inside out, where I'm not called to the trial, I'm called to the bardo. Yes, I'm willing to return to the trial, right? So that's CBRT. The challenge is that when there's awakening, people don't want to leave the bardo, which is natural because the bardo, if you are surrendering to it, is peaceful. So I have an image of that I commissioned where a woman is stepping into a giant vat, right? That's what I consider the bardo. That's the yin energy. It's saying, let's just dissolve, be one with the universe. But the man on the side of this image is holding a staff with the cicadus, the medicine thing you've seen. Mercury holds it. It's like DNA double helix, but this image comes from a long time ago. But that's the intertwining of yin and yang, the dance. And that's what happens during the trial. It's also the move from the static feminine, which is Gareth Hill, Jungian writer. The static feminine is the old yin. It's the bardo. It's the connection. It's the top of the tree. It's feeling unified. That's the womb. And then you leave the womb, whether it's the actual womb or the womb of sleep, and you're called into the world. Now, depending on your Enneagram type, you have a reaction to that call. And that determines what mask you put on. If you're at the gut level, right, the lower chakras, then you're just dealing with the overstimulation. You were quiet, things were quiet in the womb or in sleep, and now suddenly you got to deal with people. And depending on your Enneagram type, 8, you're blocking out their energy. 9, you're letting it in, but you're trying to be numbed so you can replicate what it was like in the womb. And then 1 goes 1 to 9. So 1 is you think you're right, you think you're perfect, you think you have to be perfect, and you think other people are bad. So you're letting in the energy like a sponge, but it's abrasive to you. And that's why you have to be judgmental of them. So you actually physically feel when people are being imperfect or not acting the way you want, you physically feel that. But it's all a reflection with 8 as a billiard ball, 9 as a sponge, and 1 as a sponge with sandpaper in it. All those you're feeling, you're replicating or recreating the shock of coming into the womb, or coming out of the womb where it was just very bright and cold and you were just pissed off. You wanted to stay in the womb. That's why they're anger types. They're angry about having to leave the womb, leave peace, leave unity. Perfectly reasonable. Then the second phase of the Enneagram type of the image types, they want the maternal gaze. When they got the gaze from the mother, everything seemed great. If they lost the gaze of the mother, they had shame. And so the 2 wants to be selfless or appear selfless. That's the mask that they put on because they're trying to get that positive gaze. And if you don't appreciate them or they don't feel appreciated, they're going to sulk or they're going to be angry. If they're angry, they go to Enneagram 8. All the Enneagrams go to a negative point. The 2 goes to 8. If you're in Enneagram 3, then you're not trying to appear selfless, you're trying to appear successful. And you feel like if people see you as successful, then you will feel good and you have that gaze that you want and everything will be great. A 4, it doesn't like the gaze that they're getting. It's always not quite right. They want to be seen as unique and tragic and special for their tragedy, and they don't want to hear your problems. They want you to hear their problems. That's the image types, the gaze. So the third phase is the head types, and they come to being an object permanence. Object permanence is when the mother is there, then she goes away, but you know that she still exists and she's coming back. Or maybe you're learning object permanence. So that's where the fear comes from in the head types. You want to figure out, is she coming back? Is the mother coming back? And if she comes back, what is she going to think of me? Is she going to be nice to me or not nice to me? And this usually is corroborated with a mother who is hot and cold. So the mind is very active trying to figure out, why is she cold? Why is she gone? Why is she not appreciating me? So it has the same situation of the gut and the image, but it's really disconnected from that. It can use an image, right? A 6 can go to 3, but it knows that it's false. So it doesn't trust that. And often it will put itself down or self-sabotage. The 5 is the first head type, and they're very interested in information. They want to share information with the world and be appreciated for it. So just as the 8 wants to protect themselves with a shell, and the 2 wants to protect themselves with appearing selfless, the 5 is focused on, I'll be valued for the information I provide. Then we have 7, which just wants to be not tied down, fear of commitment. And so they're the one that's impermanent. They leave first. That's a way to try to deal with the mother, be entertaining to the mother, but also leave the mother. And this fits into the move from the static feminine to the dynamic masculine. And that's what's happening in the trial. If we get to the judgment and we can reach the third stage of Gareth Hill's model, which is based on Jung, which is the dynamic feminine, then we can be more playful and we're not fearing the judgment. That's Matthew 13. Don't worry so much about being judged. And I understand if this is not clear, you can spend time talking about it. I think questions would be great if you can just detail some questions for me that I can answer them. And then, anyway, so the dynamic feminine then gives way to the static feminine. It's a return, and that's a return to old yin, top of the tree of life, and the womb in some way. You can do it in life, but it's more similar to when you're in a coma before death or after you die. This is all hypothesis, because unless you remember dying and coming back, it's hard to say that this is actually how it works. But based on my understanding and reading and personal experiences, not quite death, but things that we're approximating, it does seem to be a valid model. And so the more we can keep this model alive and then let the model go, and just value surrendering, value humility, catch the mind when it puts on a mask at the call, catch the mind when there's a conflict between mask and shadow in the trial, catch the mind when there's an attempt to judge at the return. Oh, this harvest isn't big enough, or oh, I'm in trouble, oh, I'm going to be judged. Let that go. Step into the vat as the yin. Let go of the need for the dance. But once you're in the dance, and once you let go of the dance and you're in the bardo, be willing to let that go too, to return back to another mask, another shadow, another return, and another dissolving into the bardo. What trips up a lot of spiritual teachers, as well as people in the spiritual path, is they touch into the bardo and then they want to hold on to it, which is completely natural. So if we're called to the bardo but willing to return to the trial, so again, running that circle in reverse, then it's more likely to stick around, because it's not about grasping, it's about not grasping.